son. I'm Captain Jack Sparrow. Savvy?
Rash, Turner. Too rash. That is without doubt the worst pirate I have ever seen.
The image of a pirate has been broadly covered in pop culture. The idea of the eye-patched, wooden-legged swashbuckler armed with a cutlass and a fearless attitude has been depicted many times in movies, novels, and more recently even in video games. When we hear the word pirate, we almost undoubtedly picture a person with a lot of those cliches going out into the world on great adventures and participating in epic battles. However, how much of that is actually true, and when does the fiction start? This is what we're gonna cover in this video, so hop on board, matey! Piracy is still going on today. It's not just a thing from antiquity. Many historians claim that piracy has existed ever since humans learned how to make ships, so it has been around for quite some time now. Piracy existed in the ancient Mediterranean. The word pirate derives from the Greek word piraume, which translates as I attempt or I'm experimenting, which eventually turned into piratis, meaning brigand, which also ended up evolving into the Latin word pirata, and finally into the English word pirate. On the illegal aspect, however, piracy has changed a lot over the years. The 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea defines a modern conception of piracy in its 101st article, which reads: Piracy consists of any of the following acts: any illegal acts of violence or detention, or any act of depredation committed for private ends by the crew or the passengers of a private ship or a private aircraft, and directed on the high seas against another ship or aircraft, or against persons or property on board such ship or aircraft, or against a ship, aircraft, persons, or property in a place outside the jurisdiction of any state. Any act of voluntary participation in the operation of a ship or of an aircraft with knowledge of facts making it a pirate ship or aircraft, and finally, any acts of inciting or of intentionally facilitating an act described in subparagraph A or B. For more concerns, we can assume that any individual who either robs or attacks a ship at sea or aids those who eventually do it will be considered a pirate. Fair enough, this modern definition also considers aircrafts, even though we know of no air pirates with an eye patch and wooden leg. In the ancient world, things get a little more difficult to define. While one could safely say that a modern definition of piracy would apply just fine in the 16th or 17th centuries, back then there was no established international law which states could adhere to, which means there was more leeway into what each nation would consider as piracy, in addition to how they dealt with it. The Illyrians, an ancient tribe who lived in the Balkans in antiquity, allegedly considered piracy as a legitimate form of labor for any man to live off, and often practiced it in the Mediterranean Sea. This is probably something none of us would ever dream of considering as a reasonable job, but you have to understand that the situation back then was very different from today. There were not so many professions one could get into like we have today, and the sole idea of even attempting piracy was probably as dangerous as going to war because of the limited technology of the time, which would make a pirate look much more courageous in the eyes of their countrymen. A man in poverty would choose piracy over slavery in the blink of an eye, but even merchants who suffer pirate attacks sometimes turn pirate themselves. The Mediterranean Sea was very ripe for piracy, since there are plenty of small isles where pirates could hide and make port, especially around the Aegean Sea. This helped piracy become a very common phenomenon at the time. Even the ancient Egyptians frequently fought raids from those they called as sea people, which supposedly consisted of pirates, since they offered them no quarter, which means they showed no mercy and took no prisoners, killing all the attackers. This practice was also common, but in no way it would be done in modern times. In the so-called West Indies, namely the Caribbean Sea, especially around the period known as the Golden Age of piracy, roughly defined between the 1650s and early 1720s, pirates were especially common. The European powers of the time, namely Spain, England, France and the Netherlands, each dealt with pirates in their own way, but there are some interesting facts about this. For starters, we have to distinguish between what meant to be a pirate, which could be summed up as a sea bandit, from other similar terms like buccaneer, privateer and corsair. This will be the topic of a future video, but for now it will suffice to know that piracy was a crime while the other terms had some certain legitimacy to them. The Golden Age of piracy is a term coined by the Swedish journalist named George Powell in 1894. Roughly speaking, the term spans from mid-17th century to early 18th century. During these years, the Caribbean Sea was preyed on by many pirates, causing considerable disruption to trade. From this time come the tales of some of the most famous pirates, like Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, John Calico Jack Rackham, and Edward Blackbeard Teach. During the Golden Age, Spanish rule over the West Indies was dwindling over the vast areas of land and sea, and with increasing trades to and from Europe, it created a great opportunity for pirates to capture vessels containing valuables. As Captain Charles Johnson puts in his introduction to this book, A General History of the Pirates, because it was difficult for nations to control pirate ships, in an effort to dissuade pirates, the crown would often offer royal pardons to those who would voluntarily surrender themselves. A royal pardon is a colloquial term to refer to the royal prerogative of mercy, which is an act in which the monarch would issue a pardon to a person or persons, absolving them of any crimes or legal offenses committed as if those acts had never occurred. The closest resemblance to this we have today is when a criminal makes a deal with the state, offering information in exchange for a reduced sentence. But imagine if you saw a robber, kidnapper, or even a murderer walk free because they struck a deal with the DA. Sometimes nations would even hire pirates to aid them in war against another country. This is what meant to be a corsair or privateer, which was considered as a warlike activity from a hired private entity. Don't worry, we will discuss this further in another video. Okay, so far, a pirate is a criminal at sea that robs, loots, and sometimes even kills people. But what was a pirate like in the old days? Virtually anyone could become a pirate. There were a couple of characteristics that would come in very handy for the aspirants. Most famous pirates were either officers from a navy of a nation that either retired, lost their rank, or for any other reason, with examples like Sted Bonnet or Samuel Bellamy, or were otherwise sailors or fishermen. From that background come many useful skills such as navigation, military tactics, weapon knowledge, and knowledge of ship chores. Though there were some exceptions, anyone who possessed some of these traits could end up becoming a successful pirate, and they were especially useful for pirate captains as the knowledge in those areas usually resulted in being much more respected by the crew. I haven't found any reference to any pirate crew taking in complete newbies regarding sea and ship life, but it seems reasonable that some would even take people with other more diverse skills that were still pretty useful, such as a cook or medic, though you could argue why those people would even want to join a pirate ship. The common depiction of pirates as being illiterate thugs is at best hugely exaggerated. There is no way to keep a boat afloat and navigate it in the open seas without having skilled seamen, without appropriate knowledge, and without a certain degree of discipline and the concept of duty. And this has been known ever since the first human attempted to sail in open waters. Pirates needed to be good sailors, and they also needed a way to keep order on the ship at all times. You don't want to be in the middle of a storm and have your crew fight each other over who gets to climb the mast. No, you just can't handle a ship that way. which would pose a risk to the whole crew, including the ship. This is why pirate ships had strict rules that every aspiring pirate had to agree on before becoming a member. This is what was known as the Pirate Code.
Parlay? That's the one! Parlay! 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 Damn to the depths whatever mutton they thought of parlay! That would be the French.
Though arguably not as strict as the regulations of a navy, the Pirate Code contained numerous articles that established the ground rules for life on the ship. These articles were typically voted at the time the crew was being assembled, and every member would have to sign their name or otherwise lay a mark of their own if they did not know how to write, and also swear an oath of honor that they would abide by those rules. These codes of conduct could contain more than 100 articles that would establish the rules for such things as daily life on the ship, division of plunder, compensation in case of injury, and punishments. This proves that, despite the common conceptions, pirates were not mindless bullies. The only way you can have someone work alongside you reliably is to have them do it because they want to. And to prevent trouble, the Pirate Code meant that there was an easy way to know what was acceptable and how any transgression would be dealt with. Punishments for violating the code could be pretty severe, even up to the point of execution or marooning. No, before you ask, pirates did not make others walk the plank.
Off you go! Come on!
This is also frequently depicted, and this will also be the subject of a future video. Contrary to popular belief, the way pirates handled themselves was not only democratic in nature, which was ahead of its time where monarchy was common, but was arguably even better than what we have now, since any aspiring pirate could always decline the pirate code that had been voted and choose not to join the crew, which was a great way of choosing the rules you want to be under. Try doing the same thing in any of today's democratic countries where even if you do not agree with the laws, you still have to abide by them. Not even the captain was exempt from this. Plus, the captaincy itself had to be voted by the crew, which meant that even if you were a skilled officer, you had to be respected so that the rest of the crew would want to be under your orders. Of course, usually not everyone would even come forward to being candidate for captain, as crews would usually favor those who were more competent, even if the candidate was very liked, since the orders of the captain would mean the good or misfortune of the whole crew. What does that say about our leaders of today?
Stay out of it.
The next myth regards the image of the average pirate. Having eye patches and wooden legs seemed to be a common trait of pirates according to the romanticized version in popular culture. However, there's reason to think that this was not common at all. Remember that the pirate crew were more than just criminals. They had to be effective seamen first of all, and capable soldiers close behind. You can't expect anyone without stereoscopic vision to be a great fighter, nor would you expect someone with a wooden leg to be very quick when having to climb the deck of another ship, nor even climbing to the top of the mast if needed to. This is why pirate codes contain articles regarding compensation for injuries suffered while on duty. They would distinguish between light and serious injuries, among which would be loss of limbs. Those pirates who were to suffer serious injuries would be compensated with more money and would usually just retire from the crew. While some members were capable of carrying on with their duties even if seriously injured, like the officers who could still run the ship effectively due to their knowledge and experience, most of the injured sailors would probably not be able to do so. There is special interest on how many of the most famous pirates look like. According to tales, Edward Blackbeard Teach paid special attention to his image when it was needed, In order to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy, Blackbeard would present himself with a big hat that would not let his face be seen well, and having his braided beard implanted with combustible material he would light on fire, which would shed smoke into his face, making him look like a sort of demon. On the other hand, there are also tales about other pirates who would be seen as tidy as any gentleman of the time would have been. Sted Bonnet, for example, was known as the gentleman pirate, but not only because of his clothes, but because he was a wealthy man before turning to piracy, making him a very odd example. This will also be the subject of its own video, but for now it's enough to state that a special image would be useful in some situations.
Gentlemen! Hoist the colours.
Hoist the colours.
Where's the colours?
Hoist the colours! Aye. The wind's on our side, boys! That's all we need!
The last common element attached to all pirates is, well, the famous pirate flag. Though most will recognize a pirate flag as an essential characteristic of piracy, the truth is that for the most part of pirate history, there were no flags attached to them. The term used to denote the pirate flag is a Jolly Roger. This term allegedly first appeared in the book A General History of the Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson, supposedly invented in the early 18th century by the Caribbean pirates, probably by John Rackham. It was a tool that was used as a means to fulfill an end, not as an identification. The most important aspect of a pirate raid was to capture the ship, its goods, and eventually the crew, while at the same time investing as few resources as possible. The best way to accomplish this was to have the ship surrender at the sight of the pirates, and this was one of the most important reasons why a symbol like this would be so effective. If you can have a symbol instill fear into the raided ship, you would use it without second thought. There was no single design for the flag. Although most people would identify a pirate flag as having the famous white skull and crossbones over the black background, it wasn't always like that, and most prominent pirate captains had their own flag that held specific messages according to their characters. Yes, most pirate flags included skulls and bones as a way to communicate in imminent danger, but some designs were much more complex than what we are usually shown, even included full figures and skeletons. It's important to notice that the Jolly Roger was not meant as an identification for the ship. It would be unwise for a ship to broadcast the status as a pirate ship for anyone to see, especially for any angry navy looking for criminals. Normally, pirates would hold the flag of any nation and only deploy the Jolly Roger when raiding a ship, which is contrary to many depictions in movies, where we are shown that a pirate ship has the black flag high on the mast at all times.
What? Hold up there, you! It's a shilling to tie up your boat at the dock. And I shall need to know your name.
What do you say to 3 shillings? And we forget the name.
Welcome to Port Royal, Mr. Smith.
By now, I hope you have a better understanding of what a pirate was really like. A lot of what I've covered here serves just as an introduction to this topic, so stay tuned for more as we dive deeper into the depths of the history and romance of real-life pirates.